Can everybody hear what I'm saying? Would somebody mind just confirming in the chat window in the bottom right-hand corner that you can hear me clearly and everything is working well? In the meantime, I will thank you very much for confirming. So I'll just give you a bit of an introduction on who we are and what we do. My name's James Digby. I'm the MD of Bright, and we specialise in supporting the education sector with their marketing. Everything that we do has the common theme of helping to attract people. So that might be parents, it might be customers, it might be pupils, but we also support staff as well. We know the importance of having consistent employer brand that fits in with your commercial brand. We run about 5,000 campaigns annually. We support with a range of branding and marketing projects. So we're basing this predominantly on schools and nurseries, but we will cover some educational organisations, and we also take some influence from other sectors as well, because it's important to know what other sectors are doing, because quite often that can be quite informative as to what will be coming to the education sector in the near future. So it's been a difficult few years for the education sector in general. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background in terms of where we are when we look at brand, what we're kind of considering, and just highlighting some of the points that we need to be aware when we're talking about brand, updating brand, refreshing brand, but also potentially going through a rebrand, because we know that the difficulties that the sector's faced in the last few years have been unlinked to, unparalleled in kind of their scope, and the difficulties that come from that mean that you're highly limited in your ability to necessarily brand in the way that you might want to. So we know a lot of our clients, for example, have eroded a lot of their cash reserves, and typically that's where the budget comes from rebranding. We know that economic and governmental changes, especially for things like independent schools, has really impacted parents and pupils and being able to attract them, and what works and what doesn't work in attracting them. But we've also seen that psychologically, I think a lot of the people that we work with, there has been a general lowering of confidence in being able to make informed decisions about what to do and the right direction. That's not necessarily because of the people that are involved in the process. I think that's more to do with the fact that it's next to impossible to make an informed decision if things are constantly changing. You don't know what's going to be happening in a week's time, a month's time, 6 months' time, a year or 2 years' time. It's very difficult to plan for that. On top of that, even if you could predict it, even if we were in more of a traditional recession, for example, and we knew that there would be a kind of a dip, but a strong improvement in the economy the other side, there is still that difficulty of having a lack of time and money, which everybody's always faced. It's not a new challenge, but it is compounded by the fact that you're coming from 4 or 5 years of difficulties, and there is that lack of cash reserve, as I said. So everything that I will talk through today will kind of be bearing those things in mind. So in terms of brand, if you were to Google what is brand, if you were to use AI, whatever it might be that you use to kind of understand what something is, you'll find that there's quite a variety of different descriptions of brand, number of different ways of kind of describing how it works, what it is, and what it means. So I've taken the best bits that I found, the things that I understand brand to be, and I've kind of detailed them here just to give some kind of background in terms of what we'll be referring to when we talk about brand. So I won't go into too much detail here. It's just to kind of set the standard for what we'll be talking about today. So it needs to be a blueprint for your customer experience, and that needs to be delivered consistently. You can't really have a brand, you can't really build a brand unless you're consistently implementing it. If people look at your Facebook pages and your website, and they talk to people who currently work there or currently use your nursery or your school as a service, they need to be getting a consistent message. Otherwise, it's very difficult to build up that brand messaging. There's a lot to do with relationship. A lot of branding is psychological. It is that link between business and customer, which is very, very difficult to do at the moment. People tend to be very people to people orientated. They look for reviews, they look for testimonials, they look for video where they can see and they can hear people, and they can get across passion. But a lot of what you'll be doing as a school or a nursery will be trying to build up that value that people connect with when they see your marketing and your branding with you as a business. It's very difficult to get around that. Um, it is an agreement, so it's a promise to people. I appreciate a lot of you. You're not necessarily going to be responsible for the delivery of that service, but you will be able to influence it, and you will be making sure that what you're putting out there is an accurate representation of the experience that people are going to get. I think that is really important, especially as I've just said, where reviews are so important. If you market something out and you oversell it, then you're going to struggle because you might attract people using your branding, using your positioning, but you won't be able to retain those people. And even if you do retain those people, your ratings are going to go down online. Your reputation is going to be severely damaged. And it works the other way too. If you're underselling your promise, so if you're saying we promise X, Y, and Z, and that's not a strong enough promise to people, but the reality is different, then to many degrees you're wasting having that amazing service, having that amazing offering to people, because you're not kind of promising people at the right level. In terms of this is quite a difficult one in general, but in terms of kind of the nature element of this, it's really kind of that inherent reason for your business existing. So if you're a school, for example, there's more to it than just educating children. There will be passion there. There will be goals and missions. There will be a community. There will be a reason that people work so hard there. If you're a nursery, if you're perhaps a private nursery, for example, there will be reasons why you set that up or why somebody set that up originally. Typically, it's because they believe that they could do things better than other people. So brand is a big part of that. It's getting across the nature of that business and the reasoning for your existence. And then finally, it's to make you stand out from the crowd. It's to make you distinctive. It's very difficult in a very crowded market, or a very difficult market even. It doesn't have to be crowded, but a very difficult market. It's very difficult to kind of convert people if you're not distinctive, if you don't set yourself apart from others. And a brand and updating your brand is a brilliant way to do that. So given that branding can be so expensive, not just in cost, but also in time, how do you influence people? How do you make sure that people that are involved in a rebrand, if you are going ahead with one, understand the importance of it? We put together some kind of guidance here about how it can influence a large portion of what you're doing, but in particular, the elements that people see, the elements that your senior leadership see, the elements that your customers see. So with website creation, for example, it's hard to imagine a good quality website without a very clear brand, without a consistent brand, because without that, when you talk about things like consistent language and consistent tone, it's very difficult because potentially multiple people will be involved in that content. Some people might be doing blogs, some people might be writing the actual content for the website. A head teacher might be writing a statement for the beginning of it. If you're a nursery, there might be something from the management team or from the leadership team. All of this needs to be consistent. As said before, building a brand is a lot of consistency, really. It's about understanding your messaging and repeating that messaging in a consistent way. Without branding and without clear guidance on brand, it's very difficult to kind of highlight your core values and your unique selling points. Again, in a consistent way. I don't want to keep repeating that word, but again, in a consistent way. People should be seeing this, and they should be seeing the same unique selling points as they see on your marketing campaigns. They should be seeing the same messaging here that people talk about when they come into view your nursery or your school or your organization. And then finally, as anybody will know on the call who has made a website, branding is really important to be able to make something that is consistent in terms of how it looks visually. So branding does need to make sure that it doesn't just cover the colors and the logo, but it also needs to cover kind of fonts and the types of imagery that you're going to use, so that there is guidance there for people. And for imagery, I think that's really important. Quite often people, they have some examples, or they have some examples that they're going to actually use. They're not just there kind of for reference. But as time goes on, those websites tend to move away from the initial vision, and you end up with a website that looks like it's been cobbled together over a number of years. So consistency is really important for branding, and consistency is really important for building a website that looks good, that is going to be attractive for people. It's also important that it's applied to social media. So that might be for templates, for example. As you can see here, there's an example that we've put together, and we link that to brand guidelines. We link that to work that considered the target audience, and work that considered what's kind of important to that target audience before we actually started any branding work. So make sure that if you are going to be looking at branding, you are aware that you will need to create a social media style guide, and you're going to then need to make sure that that's regularly and consistently applied through your social media schedule. And most people don't do this. You might feel it's a little step too far, but I would be considering what kind of hashtags you're going to be using, categories, tags, whatever it might be, so that that is consistent as well. And for some people, that might be that your brand guidelines are about not using hashtags, or it might be that you are using hashtags and you provide guidance on which ones to use. And then again, visually, your brand guidelines are really important, because they're going to ensure that when people look at your social media posts, they don't vary from time to time. They are consistent. They get that it's you. They can instantly see that. They can instantly recognize that. And your messaging will be repeating your key USPs. And therefore, you'll be building up some of those elements we talked about when we defined brand. So marketing materials vary from client to client, but again, without strong branding, it's going to be very difficult for you to have consistent marketing. So branded templates for brochures and flyers, they're a good thing to include in any rebranding project or any brand refresh project. Again, consistency in terms of messaging, but if you don't have those elements aligning with your brand identity, what you tend to see is that those people that perhaps receive a flyer, those people that visit your website, they receive very different messaging. And potentially there's even a third experience of those people that then come in to see you as a nursery, or come in to see you as a school, receiving something different. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that your brand also needs to be rolled out internally. People need to be aware that people will be given a certain message through your branding, so that when they do come in to see you, or when they do speak to people, or they do engage with people, that same messaging is being repeated time and time again. Um, it's really important when you're kind of considering branding, that you're going to need to be able to monitor and gather feedback from your brand. So use analytics tools prior to changing anything. That's really important. You need to know, are changes external in nature, or are they things that you have implemented from updating your brand? What's the impact of that rebrand been? Because this will be the financial element that people are going to want to see. They're going to want to know, if we spent X, Y, and Z, then what did we get in terms of return on investment? That's really difficult to measure, but at least tracking your statistics will be able to show, okay, well, initially, whilst people got used to our branding, we saw a drop off in engagement on our website, less people engaged with our social media. But as that brand messaging has been repeated, we're actually higher than where we would have been in terms of traffic if we hadn't rebranded or we hadn't updated our brand. Where you're stuck, not just once your brand has gone live, but prior to it, where you're stuck in understanding what to do, gather feedback from as many stakeholders as possible. That needs to be staff, that needs to be senior leadership, it needs to be current customers, current parents. If you're a school and you have a sixth form, I'd even go as far as saying gather it from the pupils themselves. And then adjust your messaging based on that feedback and the insights that you have. So sometimes data alone just isn't enough, and you need to go to that feedback, and you need to be looking for, okay, so we're receiving this feedback. That could be why our data is showing that not a lot of people engage with social media, or not a lot of people click through, or not a lot of people know who we are. You can then combine those two pieces of information about your data and about your feedback so that you make informed decisions about your brand. If you were to do all of this in terms of the benefits of having this, we've already talked about setting yourself apart from other people, but you can use this to be highlighting your unique qualities and your values and your offerings. Sometimes for clients, I can really see that that process in itself is really useful for them to understand how people talk about those qualities and those values, and how they talk about things with people in a coffee shop, with a friend, with family members. Because it's very difficult to do that, maybe when you've even been in an organization for just a couple of years, but it's very difficult to do that when you've been there for a very long period of time, or you're surrounded by people that have been there for a very long period of time, because you're too close to it. So the benefits of kind of building up a strong brand will be that you will understand that, because you'll be regularly reviewing what's going on, and your strong brand is going to be very clear cut. These are the three unique selling points that we're pushing, and this is how we're going to do that visually. You're going to see one of the benefits of kind of having a strong brand is you're going to see more trust and credibility when you make promises, when you make statements, when you put out facts and figures. People are going to be more likely to trust that, and therefore it's going to have a bigger impact. If you don't have a strong brand, it's very difficult to build up that trust and credibility. A good example would be lots of schools and nurseries talk about community, as in, I would say a good 80% of them. It's only those that have a strong brand really that can kind of talk about community, and people believe it and people trust it, because they may have seen 3 or 4 other schools or nurseries and they're all talking about similar things. So your strong brand is going to really help make people believe you, in short. Talked about consistency. Not going to mention it again because I feel like I've covered that enough. But it is really it's really impossible to do it, in my view, unless you build a strong brand, because people tend to go off in different routes. And it really helps you kind of define your mission, values, and goals, and to understand those in the context of positioning the school or nursery to people that might not have come across that in the past. And I find that a really useful experience throughout the process, but also once you've kind of gone live with your brand, it's really important to constantly kind of be reviewing it, see the impact, and that will help you understand your mission, values, and goals. It definitely helps to build up an emotional connection, sorry. Whether that's with students, parents, or even alumni. The stronger the brand, the the more emotional connection there is, and therefore the easier it is to persuade people for whatever it might be that you're looking to persuade people. And that perception and reputation is the strongest reason to kind of update your brand, because if you have a really great brand, then you have a really great reputation. They're very closely linked there. They're not 100% linked, because of course you can have amazing brand, but there can be instances, there can be rumors or news articles or PR elements that perhaps damage that behind the scenes. So what are we actually seeing in terms of the trends in the education sector? Um, Tradition and nostalgia, they're they're kind of your bread and butter often for branding, whether it's something you're consciously thinking about or not. But they really are becoming stronger elements. We know that for independent schools, we know for nurseries, and even state schools to a certain degree, we know that grandparents are making more of the decisions. They have more input, and that's typically because that's where the financial elements to be able to afford some of these things come from at the moment, given the economy, given the cost of living crisis. So we can see that people are linking back to kind of that sense of tradition and that nostalgia at a slightly different age group as well. So not necessarily just at the parents' age, but also for those people that perhaps are grandparents and might be funding some of this. We know that values and mission have been an important part, but really people are getting, those people who are successful at branding are getting better at integrating this with brand in a way that comes across as open and honest. So that might be things that they are very clear about in terms of what they value. Um, but they also kind of put them into the context of how that, in plain English, impacts the experience that their children or their pupils has within their nursery or school. And that's really difficult to do. As I say, with community, how do you get that across? We see that branding now relies a lot more on being perhaps a little bit more open and honest in general, using testimonials, perhaps not being quite so polished, perhaps not really coming across as so formal, but being a little bit warmer, showing behind the scenes, showing what life is like behind the scenes, but in a professional and clean way. There's definitely a lot more flexibility. Typically, people were very wedded to very, very fixed brands. For consistency, you still need to have um, some some structure to it, but there is a noticeable improvement in terms of flexibility. In terms of sometimes we're going to do this, which is slightly different to this situation. That might be for different platforms, it might be for different target audiences, whatever it might be. But that ability to be flexible is really useful. Going back to the example I gave about grandparents, if you're targeting that target audience, you might want the flexibility there to have a slightly different approach of your branding to if you're targeting the parents of the children. So that flexibility is becoming really useful. Um, and the implement stage of branding is becoming quite different. In my view, it used to be very driven just from one or two people within schools and nurseries, but now people are actually allowing parents, alumni, and even current pupils to contribute their own content. And we're seeing that from other sectors that are already ahead of the trend here. So, for example, the IT sector. I'm not saying necessarily ahead of the trend in terms of them being better. It's just it's easier in many ways to do that with software. But it's a really nice element coming from the education sector, I think. In terms of other sectors across the board, being authentic and being transparent is really, really important. The values that people put out there, the culture that you're kind of promoting to people, and the things that you kind of talk about in terms of achievements, need to be genuine. I think it's the biggest thing that we've seen in the last few years, that there's this real push for people to be truthful, not just because they want to retain those people once they've attracted them, but also because if you're not truthful, people quickly kind of feel like things are misaligned. People are talking about one thing in reviews, people are talking about one thing when they meet friends for a cup of tea, and then a completely different thing is kind of being pushed out through brand awareness, or a completely different thing is being kind of pushed out through the lead generation campaigns and internal conversations, and then the meeting with the head or the owner or the manager or whatever it might be. So um, being truthful does really help with consistency, but it also helps to be able to kind of build a reputation that attracts people. Experimental branding, I'm not necessarily saying that this should be for everybody, but a lot of people are creating experiences for students and parents that can lead kind of a lasting impression. So um, those experiences could be, say, in a nursery, they could be open days, they could be events, they could be bringing people in. For independent schools, they could be trial days where people get to take part in a science experience, if that's your element, or they get to do something in sport that they'd never do if they didn't go to that school. It can be varied. It just needs to be able to leave a lasting impression on people, and from my point of view, it needs to be a little bit experimental. It needs to be a little bit more interesting than just kind of a standard day of maybe moving from classroom to classroom, because that's what's going to attract people. And I would even link this to the first point. So whatever those experiences are, it needs to be connected to your values and your culture. So if sport's a big part of your culture, for example, then perhaps some of those experiences can be linked to sport. Interactive branding, um, from a small scale, things like polls on social media platforms, we know that they're getting great engagement at the moment. On a large scale, live sessions online that people can talk to the head teacher or the head of sixth form or the manager of a nursery or whoever it might be, are really, really important. They're really useful. You don't have to do them, but from my point of view, um, trialing them every now and again is important, because it allows you to see who isn't who's interested but who isn't attending anything face to face. So it might be people looking to relocate back to the UK or relocate to the UK. They may not have lived here before. It might be people that um, can't attend due to work commitments, can't attend because of illness, whatever it might be. Online sessions are really, really useful. So there's a number of things that you can do to kind of have interactive branding. But do set that out in your brand guidelines. What boundaries are you going to be setting for your brand in terms of kind of being interactive? And then we also do a session on this, but storytelling is a massive part of branding now. So videos and infographics are really important. People being able to see something quickly and absorb that information is really important. And from a storytelling point of view, it needs to be things about people. So what's actually happening in real life examples for children that have attended your school or your nursery. What was the situation like when they started? What was it like during the middle? What did you do to support them? And what was it the other end of the process, the other end of the experience for them? So a lot to kind of consider really with branding, but how do you know if you need to rebrand? Um, Personally, I'll just go and ask people. I think it is the easiest way. You can run projects. We run projects for clients all the time for this, about perceptions. What do people like? What do people dislike about your branding? What do potential customers think? can you get hold of data for people where maybe your school or your nursery was the second or the third choice for them? If you've got that data set, or you're gathering that data set, go and ask those people, why were you second, third, or fourth choice for them? If your conversion rates are going down over time, that shouldn't be the case. I appreciate that markets are difficult at the moment, but constant innovation, being agile, should be able to counter that. If you're not able to counter it with that, then considering a rebrand is important. It's really important that you, as a marketing professional or business owner or a department head, whatever your role might be, you need to feel proud of your brand. You need to feel proud of your marketing. If you're not feeling proud and you're not feeling excited about it, it's very difficult for you to talk about it with passion. It's very difficult for you to roll it out internally and externally in a clean, concise, but also exciting way. And how do you compare to competitors? What are other people doing? At the moment, a lot of people are changing their branding, they're changing their positioning. So make sure that you do have a competitor analysis that's broken down on different brand elements. It needs to be memorable. People need to see your branding, and it needs to leave a lasting impression so that the next time they see your marketing, they still remember it. We know that the number of times that somebody needs to see marketing material has nearly doubled in the last few years. There's a lot of marketing fatigue. You can reduce the number of times people need to see your marketing before they take action by having a memorable brand. And then growth is a big part of this. Are you looking to kind of get into new markets? Are you looking to attract new people? What are you looking to do? Because if those are big, scary kind of challenges for people, then you're going to need an updated brand or a new brand to be able to achieve that. So if you did decide to go ahead, what are you going to need to do? The list is incredibly long, unfortunately, but I've kind of summarized this into the three areas that you're going to need to kind of start with. So do you have a really clearly defined vision and goals? Do you really understand why you exist as an organization? Do you have a good understanding of your customers? Do you have customer profiles? Do you have personas? Do you have the means to be able to kind of get to know your customers better? And do you know their buying patterns? Do they take a week to convert? Do they take 6 months to convert? Do people consider this when their child is born, or do they consider it just when they need it? And then you need to kind of start considering kind of the core elements of your brand. What's the tone going to be? What's it going to look like visually? And what kind of tagline are you going to be hanging a lot of this branding off? So again, the actual process is quite complex. It needs to be project managed. It needs to be managed very clearly so that people meet the timelines that they've agreed up front. But if you kind of condense this down, there's three core stages here. The research stage to get to understand those stakeholders, and I really advise that this stage isn't skipped. A lot of people do, because you need to make sure that you're basing your decision on data and facts and not just your own opinion on things. You need to then take that research and then build something which is creative and suitable for those target audiences. It's accurate, so it needs to be based on what you're actually offering as a service. And then you need to have a plan to implement it. So how are you going to roll it out to stakeholders? How are you going to be making sure that people are bought into it, that they believe in the new branding? So I've covered quite a few different elements there. I'm actually at the end of my presentation, so there's a chance for some questions if anybody has any questions. But if not, thank you very much for attending. Feel free to email me back. We're going to send out the recording, but feel free to email me back if you have any questions after this, or you'd like to speak to me about any of our services or any of the points that I've raised in the presentation. But does anybody have any questions for me?